He personally baptized an estimated 300,000 people, many of them slaves. He is remembered for radical compassion in an age of cruelty and spent a majority of his life trying to alleviate the suffering of enslaved people. This is the story of Saint Peter Claver, a Jesuit priest who dedicated his life to helping slaves. Saint Peter Claver is the patron saint of slaves, African missions, interracial justice, and seafarers. He is also one of the patron saints of Colombia. Peter Claver was born in 1580 in the village of Verdú in Spain. He studied at the University of Barcelona and was noted for his intelligence and piety. He also encountered Jesuits for the first time. After 2 years of studying, Claver wrote these words in the notebook he kept throughout his life: "I must dedicate myself to the service of God until death, on the understanding that I am like a slave." After completing his studies in Barcelona, 20-year-old Claver entered the Society of Jesus in Tarragona. While there, he met a person who'd have a profound effect on his life, Alphonsus Rodriguez, who would also later be canonized as a saint. He was known for his holiness and gift of prophecy. Rodriguez felt that he had been told by God that Claver should spend his life in service of the colonies of New Spain, and he frequently urged Claver to accept that calling and consider being a missionary in the New World. Inspired by Rodriguez, Claver offered himself for the missions in the Spanish colonies. In 1610 he was sent to the New Kingdom of Granada in modern-day Colombia. He was required to spend 6 years studying theology, and he lived in the Jesuit houses of Tunja and Bogotá. During those preparatory years, he was deeply disturbed by the harsh treatment and living conditions of the black slaves who were brought from Africa. He later went to Cartagena on the Caribbean coast, and in 1616, he was ordained a priest. Mining was a major industry in the area. To meet their labor requirements, mine owners imported blacks from Angola and Congo, whom they purchased in West Africa. Others were also kidnapped or captured at random and sent to the gold and silver mines. By this time, the Church had already condemned the practice of slavery. Both Pope Paul III and Urban VIII had issued papal decrees condemning slavery. They were later joined by Pope Pius IX. But trade was profitable, it was a lucrative business, and continued to flourish. About a century earlier, King Ferdinand of Spain began the colonial slavery culture by authorizing the purchase of 250 African slaves in Lisbon for his territories in New Spain. And by the 17th century, transatlantic slave trade was at its height, and Cartagena was one of the largest slave trading ports in the Americas. Cartagena was one of the first 2 settlements the Spaniards set up in the area. It soon became a slave trading hub, and about 10,000 slaves poured into the port annually. The transport conditions were so horrible that about a third died in transit. In the midst of this turmoil, Claver found a mentor and inspiration: Alonso de Sandoval. Sandoval devoted himself to serving the slaves for years. He was so integrated in the lives of the slaves that he learned their customs and languages. He later wrote a book about the nature, customs, rights, and beliefs of the Africans. Unlike Sandoval, who visited the slaves where they worked, Claver preferred to head for the wharf as soon as a slave ship entered the port. He boarded the ships to treat and minister to the badly treated and terrified human cargo. This was the stage when the slaves were most terrified and vulnerable. While the slaves were being processed for purchase, Claver joined them with medicine, food, bread, and lemons. He cleansed wounds, applied ointment and bandages, and spoke about God. He had to work fast as the slaves were usually in Cartagena for a short time. Claver saw the slaves he had baptized as fellow Christians, and encouraged others to treat them as such. During the time of the year when no slaves were expected to arrive, he traveled the country, visiting plantation after plantation, to give spiritual consolation to the slaves. During his 40 years of ministry, it is estimated that he personally catechized and baptized 300,000 slaves. His contact with the slaves who remained on the island did not end with baptism. He would then follow up on them to ensure that as Christians they received their Christian and civil rights. He tried his best to ensure that those he baptized were treated humanely. Soon, the city magistrates considered him a nuisance for his persistent advocacy on behalf of the slaves. Claver's work was not limited to slaves. He also preached in the city square to sailors and traders. He ministered to the souls of well-to-do members of society. Claver also worked with condemned criminals, many of whom he spiritually prepared for death. He also regularly visited hospitals. Later in life, Claver became too ill to leave his room. For about 4 years he was allegedly physically abused and starved by an ex-slave who had been hired by the superior of the house to care for him. He never complained about his treatment, accepting it as a just punishment for his sins. He died on September 8, 1654. When the news of his death spread throughout Cartagena, many came to his room to pay their last respects. Such was his reputation for holiness that the room was stripped bare of anything that might serve as a relic. The city magistrates, in an incredible turnaround, ordered a public funeral and he was buried with pomp and ceremony. The scope of Claver's ministry, which was prodigious even before considering the astronomical number of people he baptized, was realized only after his death. On June 20, 1850, Peter Claver was beatified by Pope Pius IX. On January 15, 1888 he was canonized by Pope Leo XIII. His feast day is September 9. Today he is also known as the Slave of Slaves for his tireless advocacy. Despite Saint Peter Claver's devotion to serving the enslaved, a controversy hounded him, which may have delayed his beatification and canonization. Though he fought for slaves' rights, he himself had slaves, although they were probably provided by the Jesuit order. Unlike most slave owners who used them in plantations and mines, he used them for his ministry instead of hard labor. He also treated them much more humanely, but nevertheless they were not free. Critics also point out that Claver focused on ameliorating suffering rather than working to abolish slavery. His efforts have been compared and contrasted with other Catholics and missionaries during the period. Among them are Bartolomé de las Casas and the Capuchin friars Francisco José de Jaca and Epifanio de Moirans. They all offered a more radical approach and were more vocal about slavery's abolition. Saint Peter Claver's holiness was real, but his vision was limited by the cultural blind spots of his age. His example is both inspiring and a reminder of how even saints can fall short of full justice. He was a saint who lived extraordinary holiness but also reflected the contradictions of his time. In the 17th century, slavery was largely accepted by both church and state. Expecting him to think like a 21st century abolitionist is anachronistic. Despite this controversy, Saint Peter Claver remains relevant today. The modern world still struggles with racism, modern slavery, and human trafficking. Claver's life is a call to fight these injustices with courage and compassion. Thank you for watching. Do you think it was enough that Saint Peter Claver worked hard to alleviate the sufferings of slaves, or should he have done more? Why or why not? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Please help us share the good word by liking, subscribing, and sharing this video.